and welcome to Dear Mr. Potter. I'm Alistair Stevens. In tonight's session, we cover the end of Chapter 19 and the discovery of dragons, Chapter 20 and the taking of tests, and Chapter 21, the exposition of elves. That's the Hungarian Horntail, the first task, and the House Elf Liberation Front, for those of you keeping track of your chapter titles. And you may be able to tell that I'm a little less interested in the third of tonight's three chapters than I am in the preceding two, but only because the preceding two are so important, are so significant, so weighty, so possessed of a somber kind of gravity that is going to change our understanding of Harry Potter's Wizarding World through the rest of the series, because it is finally time to really start diving into what is good in the Harry Potter universe. Not what's good about the series, not what do we enjoy about these books, but what is our understanding of virtue in the Harry Potter universe. It has been observed that J.K. Rowling lacks, within the frame of the Harry Potter stories, a kind of unifying moral compass. That is to say that she doesn't have either the explicit moral compass of, for example, C.S. Lewis's Narnia stories, or the implicit moral compass of J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings series. She doesn't give us a really developed philosophy of virtue as we move through this book. So we are left to try to piece together and to figure out what it is that makes people good in the Harry Potter world. And we're really going to get a chance to dive into that tonight as we see people rejecting convention, rejecting the rules, acting out in really interesting ways, but also finding a better balance, finding a greater sense of equity within that, particularly as we move through into the first test and the first real hurdle in Harry's passage to becoming the champion of the Triwizard Tournament. More on that in just a bit, because we have to pick up from the end of Chapter 19, as I said previously, and talk a little bit about dragons. So you'll recall that Harry had snuck out to Hogsmeade with Hermione under his invisibility cloak. They had sought refuge from the inclement weather. They had been enjoying their butterbeer when Hagrid and Moody came in for a drink. Moody is able to magically pierce the veil of Harry's invisibility cloak, and he commands Harry on his ingenious approach to remaining unobserved, and Hagrid invites Harry down to the forest that night. That is where we are going to pick up with this narrative. Here we go. 4 fully grown, enormous, vicious-looking dragons were rearing onto their hind legs inside an enclosure fenced with thick planks of wood, roaring and snorting. Torrents of fire were shooting into the dark sky from their open, fanged mouths, 50 feet above the ground on their outstretched necks. There was a silvery blue one with long, pointed horns, snapping and snarling at the wizards on the ground, a smooth-scaled green one which was writhing and stamping with all its might, a red one with an odd fringe of fine gold spikes around its face, which was shooting mushroom-shaped fire clouds into the air, and a gigantic black one, more lizard-like than the others, which was nearest to them. At least 30 wizards, 7 or 8 to each dragon, were attempting to control them, pulling on the chains connected to heavy leather straps around their necks and legs. Mesmerized, Harry looked up high above him and saw the eyes of the black dragon with vertical pupils like a cat's, bulging with either fear or rage. He couldn't tell which. It was making a horrible noise, a yowling, screeching scream. "Keep back there, Hagrid!" yelled a wizard near the fence, straining on the chain he was holding. "They can shoot fire at a range of 20 feet, you know. I've seen this Horndale 240. "Beautiful," said Hagrid softly. "It's no good," yelled another wizard. "Stunning spells on the count of 3. The dragons are an essential component of the first test. And here we are doing a dexterous piece of foreshadowing, emphasizing just how dangerous fully grown dragons are. Dragons have been used specifically in the instance of Norbert in the course of the series, but also metaphorically. Dragons have been used in the course of Harry Potter in much the same way as we would use dragons in the real world, as a symbol of unfathomable power and real, brutal, animalistic danger. And here we are getting that represented beautifully. 4 very different kinds of dragons, all of whom are being treated in roughly the same way, all of whom are being constrained, are being driven to a singular purpose. And obviously we are going to pair off our dragons and our champions in the next chapter. But it's interesting to look at the points of comparison between the 4 dragons who have been selected for the Triwizard Tournament being treated, not physically, of course, in the same way as the 4 champions who have been selected for the Triwizard Tournament are being treated, but metaphorically being treated in very similar ways. Here the dragons are actually bound, actually constrained, actually bordered by a fence, of course, in the first instance, that you've got to wonder about that fence, you've got to wonder about that enclosure, right? But also a number of wizards watching out for them, seeking to constrain them, seeking, as we see here at the end of this slide, to deploy stunning spells to keep the dragons under control. And I am reminded of the magical contract, which is binding Harry and Fleur and Victor and Cedric into their pursuit of the Triwizard Tournament crown too. Everyone here is playing their part. Everyone here is doing what they were meant to do, doing what was intended. And that may have some interesting consequences and interesting complexities later in the story. So this is our introduction to the dragons themselves. As I said last time, I've been struggling to find deeper resonances within the quadpartite structure, I suppose, of our heroes, of the champions of the Triwizard Tournament, and with the dragons too. Maybe more on that. If we have a few spare moments, we'll maybe look at the breakdown between each of the champions and their appointed dragon when we get to it. But this is not the only thing that we visit the dragons for. It's not just an introduction. We get some shady dragon business. The dragon keepers lowered their wands and walked forward to their fallen charges, each of which was the size of a small hill. They hurried to tighten the chains and fasten them securely to iron pegs, which they forced deep into the ground with their wands. "Want a closer look?" Hagrid asked Madame Maxime excitedly. The pair of them moved right up to the fence, and Harry followed. The wizard who had warned Hagrid not to come any closer turned, and Harry realized who it was. Charlie Weasley. "All right, Hagrid," he panted, coming over to talk. "They should be okay now. We put them out with a sleeping draught on the way here. Thought it might be better for them to wake up in the dark and the quiet, but like you saw, they weren't happy. Not happy at all." "What breeds you got here, Charlie?" said Hagrid, gazing at the closest dragon, the black one, with something close to reverence. Its eyes were still just open. Harry could see a strip of gleaming yellow beneath its wrinkled black eyelid. "This is a Hungarian horntail," said Charlie. "That's a common Welsh green over there, the smaller one, a Swedish short snout, that blue-grey, and a Chinese fireball. That's the red." Charlie looked around. Madame Maxime was strolling away around the edge of the enclosure, gazing at the stunned dragons. "I didn't know you were bringing her, Hagrid," Charlie said, frowning. "The champions aren't supposed to know what's coming. She's bound to tell her student, isn't she?" "Just thought she'd like to see them," shrugged Hagrid, still gazing enraptured at the dragons. "Really romantic date, Hagrid," said Charlie, shaking his head. So this is perhaps the first point at which we are asked to consider, implicitly, of course, asked to consider goodness and virtue and honesty. And honesty of those three qualities is far and away the most important in our discussion of what makes a good person within the world of Harry Potter. Good people are honest in a way that has only a tangential relationship to the truth. They are not necessarily honest in word and deed, but they are honest to each other. They are honest with each other. They are bound by a kind of greater loyalty. Why is Hagrid doing this thing? Well, okay. Trivially, he wants Harry to see the dragons. That is why he approaches Harry in the Three Broomsticks. That's why he gives him this information. He knows what he's doing. He knows that Harry is here invisible. He knows that he is technically breaking the rules of the Triwizard Tournament by giving Harry this advantage. It is absolutely stark in the rules of the tournament that no student be given the heads up regarding any of the tasks. But he also brings Madame Maxime. And what are we to make of that? Clearly, the book is leaning on this idea that it is a date, right? We get Hagrid's outlandish and somewhat comedically grotesque outfit that he's put on. We get Charlie here calling it a really romantic date, Hagrid, said Charlie, shaking his head, failing to recognize, I think, that actually this is a really romantic date. This is something that is very important to Hagrid because Hagrid here is sharing that thing which moves him more than any other. He is being not obedient to the rules of the Triwizard Tournament, not even necessarily obedient to rules of common decorum, right? Really romantic date? Well, maybe. You're wearing this weird furry suit? Okay, that's maybe not ideal either. But he is being fundamentally true to himself. He is being vulnerable and transparent in a way that enkindles and bespeaks and respects loyalty. He is making connections. And when we look at goodness within the frame of Harry Potter, we are, of course, encouraged to look at its absence, which is, in a way, what we've been doing up to this point, right? We've talked about those qualities that define Harry's heroism. The fact that he is inherently, innately exceptional. The fact that he is a Gryffindor and thus more courageous than the average bear or indeed the average dragon. The fact that he has these powerful, connective friendships, most notably with Ron and Hermione, but not just with Ron and Hermione. He is willing to put his life on the line. He is willing to step into danger, to step into the dragon's maw, as it were, in order to protect people. And partly that is a function of his own exceptionalism. Who else can do it, if not Harry? But it's also a sign that he draws together communities. Now, we are going to see this realized most powerfully, most eloquently in the next book in the series, but it is already happening. As Harry is more isolated than ever, we are feeling that tension. We're feeling that stress. Why is Harry having such a hard time facing the first task? Why is he having such a hard time dealing with the threats to his life here in the context of the Triwizard Tournament, in the context of the Dark Mark, in the context of the return potentially of Voldemort? Why is he struggling so much? Well, because he is alone. The great virtue of community within the pages of Harry Potter seems to some extent to be community. That is to say that virtue is kind of self-selecting. And we're kind of accustomed to this, and we're going to see an interesting perspective on this in the last chapter of tonight's reading when we talk a little about the house elves, when we talk about Dobby and Winky in the kitchen. Just to anticipate that, because it's also possible that we won't get to that slide this evening. I have so many to cover. But at one point, Winky observes that Dobby is a bad elf. That by speaking ill of his masters, by speaking the truth about his masters, he is a bad elf. And there we get a powerful inversion, right? Harry is going to break the rules. He is going to be engaged in some deceitful behavior. He's not actually going to lie outright, but he is going to emit valuable information. And so are many, many other people. Many, many other people already have, in fact. But we are going to see Alistair Moody and we are going to see Ludo Bagman also kind of walk very, very close to that line, very close to that line of breaking the explicit rules of the Triwizard Tournament. But we believe that these people are good, despite the fact that they are not acting in accordance with the stated rules and governance of their community. Now, Winky is going to invert that. Winky is actually going to give us a much more classic kind of Aristotelian perspective on virtue ethics here. Because Winky is going to say, no, you are not doing what a house elf does, ergo, necessarily, you are a bad house elf. But wizards rebel. Wizards don't obey the structures of their society. We have seen that literally from the beginning of the book. The decision to stash Harry away with the Dursleys, did that come down through the Ministry of Magic? Did that come down through some organized, legalistic, social structure? No, that came from Dumbledore. That came from Dumbledore himself, taking powerful authority, taking powerful action, taking exceptional action within the frame of a threat that had been levied against the entire wizarding community and was still, for all anyone knew at that point, still a present danger to the entire wizarding community. Dumbledore took exceptional action. We discussed this, of course, in Chamber of Secrets to a certain degree, particularly with regard to Harry's the suspicions which fell upon Harry and his complicated role with the rest of the school through the back half of Chamber of Secrets. And then, of course, we explored that really quite profoundly in Prisoner of Azkaban when we talked about the collapse of the legalistic structures, all of which is, of course, reflected through Harry's adolescent experience, but is also true of the rest of the wizarding world. I suppose it's actually Chamber of Secrets, right? It's the sending of Hagrid to Azkaban. Even given that at the time we didn't know, and it's evident from the pages of the book that J.K. Rowling didn't know either that what Azkaban was. She didn't know what she was doing at that point, or rather, she didn't know the additional meaning that she would attach to this decision later in the series. But it is still, well, it's unlawful detainment, right? It is the wizarding society breaking its own laws, breaking those moral precepts which it holds ostensibly sacred in order to actually protect people. And throughout the wizarding world, from James and Remus and Sirius and Peter and Severus all the way back in the 1970s, to the rise of Voldemort in the first place, to Harry's entire career at Hogwarts, to Hermione using the Time Turner to leverage some advantage here in her studies at Hogwarts, an advantage which would be, not necessarily less than virtuous if Hermione were the only student at Hogwarts. But wizarding culture is competitive. Is Hermione going to be head girl at Hogwarts now because of her use of the Time Turner in her third year? Because that seems like an unfair advantage. Wizards are all about unfair advantages. They're all about the subversion of the established and stated status quo in the pursuit of what? Loyalty, yes, check. Community, yes. The virtues, to a certain extent, laid out by the four houses of Hogwarts, yes. And of course, we can include loyalty and community there as Hufflepuff traits, right? Bravery, yes. If you do something terrifically brave, if you do something sufficiently brave, then it doesn't really matter if you broke the written rules. It doesn't really, impact our judgment of your character. Quite the opposite, in fact. If you are true enough and loyal enough and brave enough, if you are wise enough and smart enough and study hard enough, or if you are ambitious enough, if you are, I suppose, ruthless enough, if you are, I suppose we could say, pragmatic enough, then you also get to step outside of the rules of your society. So all of this is to say that Harry Potter's Wizarding World establishes a really interesting kind of implicit subversion of what we would think of as Aristotelian virtue ethics. Aristotelian virtue ethics is that philosophical school of thought which says that actually good and bad are all relative. Good and bad are only defined by the community in which you find yourself. If you find yourself living in a culture of Norse warriors or of Klingons, right? If you find yourself in a martial warrior culture, then strength and aggression and ruthlessness on the battlefield are actually virtues. And you are therefore a good Norse warrior if you embody those virtues, and a bad Norse warrior if you don't, or a good Klingon or a bad Klingon or whatever. This is to suggest that in a universal or on a universal level, on a universal scale, all morality is relative. But on individual scales, our own internalized morality is the product of the communities in which we find ourselves. Now, the Wizarding World kind of plays with that, because it states pretty boldly, no, actually, we're about convention and about the rules, and everywhere you turn in wizarding society, there are just hierarchies of legalistic structures designed to define and shape that society. But we're generally very suspicious of people who conform to that superstructure, who conform to that architecture. One Percy Weasley comes to mind, for example, right? People who are too attentive to the rules, well, they're suspicious, because wizards love to rebel. Wizards love, from Harry Potter on down to the, I suppose if we're taking Harry as the most exceptional student at Hogwarts, who is the least exceptional student at Hogwarts? Not in the sense of the least gifted or the least skilled or the least talented, but the least unusual. I might be tempted to go to an Ernie Macmillan, right? I might be tempted to go to a Justin Finch Fletchley. Yeah, I'll need to give that some more thought. You guys, I'm sure, have some thoughts here in the chat. We can talk about that as we move forward. So from the most exceptional to the least exceptional wizards in Hogwarts in particular, and in the Wizarding World in general, what do we value? Exceptionalism. We value rule breaking. Why is Harry fated? For constantly breaking the rules, for constantly defying expectations, for constantly taking matters into his own hands, for constantly being famous and endangering himself and others? Well, because that's what a great wizard does. And we see that echoed up and down the hierarchical structures of Hogwarts specifically, and the Wizarding World in general. All of this, I should say, is meant to be, just an introduction with regard to the morality, the complex morality of Harry Potter. So we'll keep moving forward and we'll see where we get. Let me see. Oh, whimsy, says Father John. Yes, whimsy is also very important. Very good. Let me see here. Oh, Lynn is asking, did I clarify that I wasn't going to look at the chat so closely anymore? I wonder why. No, unfortunately, I'm not looking at the chat so closely simply because there are so many of you, and specifically tonight because we have so many slides. So I do apologize. If you have points you really desperately want me to see, then you can use the question button there to submit your questions, and I'll hopefully have some time to take a look at the end of that. Excellent, excellent. All right, let's keep... Good. Let's keep pushing on here, because we're about to get a really powerful exploration of the opposite of virtue, right? We can understand why Hagrid is doing what he's doing. We can even understand to a certain degree, I think, why Madame Maxime is doing what she's doing. We can certainly understand why Harry is doing what he's doing. But look at the way that we oppose these technically unlawful or technically, illegal in the sense of, against the rules, these technically rule-breaking behaviors with Karkaroff. Let's take a look at this next slide. "Who's there?" said Karkaroff again, very suspiciously, looking around in the darkness. Harry remained still and silent. After a minute or so, Karkaroff seemed to decide that he had hit some sort of animal. He was looking around at waist height as though expecting to see a dog. Then he crept back under the cover of the trees and started to edge forward toward the place where the dragons were. Very slowly and very carefully, Harry got to his feet and set off again as fast as he could without making too much noise, hurrying through the darkness back toward Hogwarts. He had no doubt whatsoever what Karkaroff was up to. He had sneaked off his ship to try and find out what the first task was going to be. He might even have spotted Hagrid and Madame Maxime heading off toward the forest together. They were hardly difficult to spot at a distance. And now all Karkaroff had to do was follow the sound of voices, and he, like Madame Maxime, would know what was in store for the champions. By the looks of it, the only champion who would be facing the unknown on Tuesday was Cedric. That's slimy Karkaroff. I can't believe that he has sneaked off of his ship in the middle of the night to plunge into the forest and discover the secret of the dragons. How dare he? Isn't that so like Karkaroff? Isn't that so like a Durmstranger? Is there a certain hypocrisy here from Harry? Well, technically, yes. If finding out about the dragons is a bad thing, if it is a capital B, capital T bad thing, if it is the wrong thing to do, then he is as guilty of it as Karkaroff, as Madame Maxime. Madame Maxime didn't seem to know what she was being led to. Harry didn't seem to know what he was being led to until the moment of realization. But obviously neither does Karkaroff. He doesn't know that he's going to find dragons. He knows that he's going to find out about the first test, which Harry obviously did too. Madame Maxime might be able to preserve a certain kind of innocence here. Well, I didn't know that this was happening. I didn't know where Hagrid was taking me. I thought we were on a date. I thought we were going to go to the Three Broomsticks. Turns out, clearing in the forest, a bunch of dragons. Like, weird, I know, but there we are. In any case, they are still bound to preserve that information, to keep that secret from the champions of the Triwizard Tournament. Harry's the only one who isn't, right? Because he's allowed to do what he wants. He's allowed to do what he wants because he is one of the champions. He's not bound by the same rules. Let's pivot back here. We've got to move back to Hogwarts now. Leaving the forest behind, we've got to catch up with Sirius Black, who appears in the fireplace in the middle of the night.
Karkaroff, said Sirius. Harry, he was a Death Eater. You know what Death Eaters are, don't you?
Yes. What?
He was caught. He was in Azkaban with me, but he got released. I bet everything that's why Dumbledore wanted an Auror at Hogwarts this year, to keep an eye on him. Moody caught Karkaroff, put him into Azkaban in the first place.
Karkaroff got released, Harry said slowly. His brain seemed to be struggling to absorb yet another piece of shocking information. Why did they release him?
He did a deal with the Ministry of Magic, said Sirius bitterly. He said he'd seen the error of his ways, and then he named names. He put a load of other people into Azkaban in his place. He's not very popular in there, I can tell you. And since he got out, from what I can tell, he's been teaching the dark arts to every student who passes through that school of his. So watch out for the Durmstrang champion as well.
Okay, said Harry slowly. But are you saying Karkaroff put my name in the goblet? Because if he did, he's a really good actor. He seemed furious about it. He wanted to stop me from competing.
We know he's a good actor, said Sirius, because he convinced the Ministry of Magic to set him free, didn't he? Now, I've been keeping an eye on the Daily Prophet, Harry.
You and the rest of the world, said Harry bitterly.
And reading between the lines of that Skeeter woman's article last month, Moody was attacked the night before he started at Hogwarts. Yes, I know she says it was another false alarm, Sirius added hastily, seeing Harry about to speak. But I don't think so, somehow. I think someone tried to stop him from getting to Hogwarts. I think someone knew their job would be a lot more difficult with him around. And no one's going to look into it too closely. Mad Eye's heard intruders a bit too often. But that doesn't mean he can't still spot the real thing. Moody was the best Auror the Ministry ever had.
So, Karkaroff was a Death Eater. He had served his time in Azkaban. He was released through a deal with the Ministry of Magic, which is interesting, because it doesn't seem as though Karkaroff is a British citizen. It doesn't seem as though he is an inhabitant of that sceptred isle there off the west coast of Europe. Rather, it seems like he's from wherever Durmstrang is from, right? Like he's from there. We draw no geographical distinction between Karkaroff's background and the geographical location of Durmstrang, so we can assume that connection goes deep. That presumably is why he returned to that school of his, as Sirius Black says, and yet he is imprisoned in Wizard Prison in Britain. Is Azkaban a British prison? Is Azkaban an international prison? Was he extradited to Britain? These are questions that we cannot answer. These are questions that we are simply not given enough information regarding to even begin to speculate. And yet here I am, tempted to speculate about them. What's really important here, of course, is that Sirius is once again, having driven his crowbar of truth and of justice into the foundations of the Ministry of Magic in the last book. Now he is continuing to apply leverage and to crack those stones open. He did a deal with the Ministry of Magic, said Sirius bitterly. He said he'd seen the error of his ways, and then he named names. He put a load of other people in Azkaban in his place. He's not very popular in there, I can tell you. So let's look at what actually happened. On the surface, at least, Karkaroff came to a realization that he had been led awry by dark magic, by the power, by the glory, by the grandeur, by the personal presence and magical charisma, I suppose, of Lord Voldemort himself, that he had been wrong in being a Death Eater, and then he named names. He got other Death Eaters, other supporters of Voldemort, other people who had transgressed and committed crimes against the Wizarding World, and presumably against the Muggle world too, back during the Wizarding War. He gets them locked up in Azkaban. Well, there's a version of this story that isn't actually terrible, right? There's a version of the story that isn't awful. What we have here is simply Sirius Black's suspicion. And also the implicit understanding that actually, once you're a Death Eater, you're a Death Eater for life. There is the strong implication here that Karkaroff obviously hasn't had a change of heart. That is a ridiculous thing. He did a deal with the Ministry of Magic, said Sirius bitterly. Seeing the error of his ways is just his opening gambit there. Like, exhibiting regret for his transgressions, that is all that he needs to begin the negotiation. And then it's just accounting. How many people does he have to surrender to the ministry? How many people does he have to have incarcerated in Azkaban before he earns his release? That seems to be Sirius's allegation here. And whether we believe it or not, whether we believe that that is the entirety of the plot that unfolded surrounding Karkaroff's time in Azkaban, or we believe that it is more complicated than that, more subtle than that, more nuanced than that, it may be. We have no reason to speculate in that direction right now. But even if it, or I suppose whether it is or it isn't, what is important is that Karkaroff is now under a shadow because he was a Death Eater. Not because he was in Azkaban, right? On the list of who Harry trusts, Sirius Black's name is pretty close to the top. Sirius was in Azkaban. Hagrid was in Azkaban. Being in Azkaban is not the defining characteristic of Karkaroff. What defines Karkaroff, what makes us suspicious of Karkaroff, was the fact that he was a Death Eater. It is not that he was convicted of his crimes, because as we know, people can be erroneously convicted of his crimes. What distinguishes the Death Eaters themselves is that they, at least back in the day, proclaimed it proudly. It wasn't a morally relative question. It wasn't even a legally relative question. It was a question of actual identity. You have chosen to be this thing, and thus you are defined as that thing for the rest of your life. Then, of course, we get the suggestion here that Mad-Eye Moody was in fact attacked the night before he came to Hogwarts, which was the introduction that we got. Actually, you'll remember Amos Diggory calling Arthur Weasley about the attack on Mad-Eye Moody. That was our inciting incident for the Mad-Eye Moody subplot. And Sirius Black seems to think, well, yeah, not only because Moody was the best Auror in history, he's the best Auror who ever Aured. No, not just that. He's the one who specifically locked up Karkaroff. Which suggests, if we follow Sirius Black's logic, that Dumbledore knew that Karkaroff was going to be leading the Durmstrang delegation, which is confirmed by the Durmstrang delegation's arrival at Hogwarts, right? Dumbledore does not seem to be surprised. We get no mark of surprise from him. Oh, Karkaroff, you old Death Eater, how are you? No, he obviously knows who it is, and if Sirius Black can be believed at this point, Dumbledore was moving the pieces, was putting his plan together, his response together to the incursion of a known Death Eater into Hogwarts. Let's see here. Good. Let's wrap up this chapter, in fact, and then we'll maybe take a moment for some questions. Harry heard a tiny pop in the fire behind him and knew Sirius had gone. He watched the bottom of the spiral staircase. Who had decided to go for a stroll at 1 o'clock in the morning and stopped Sirius from telling him how to get past a dragon? It was Ron. Dressed in his maroon paisley pajamas, Ron stopped dead, facing Harry across the room and looked around. Who are you talking to? He said. What's that got to do with you? Harry snarled. What are you doing down here at this time of night? I just wondered where you... Ron broke off, shrugging. Nothing. I'm going back to bed. Just thought you'd come nosing around, did you? Harry shouted. He knew that Ron had no idea what he'd walked in on, knew he hadn't done it on purpose, but he didn't care. At this moment, he hated everything about Ron, right down to the several inches of bare ankles showing beneath his pajama trousers. Sorry about that, said Ron, his face reddening with anger. Should have realized you didn't want to be disturbed. I'll let you get on with practicing for your next interview in peace. Harry seized one of the Potter really stinks badges off the table and chucked it as hard as he could across the room. It hit Ron on the forehead and bounced off. There you go, Harry said. Something for you to wear on Tuesday. You might even have a scar now if you're lucky. That's what you want, isn't it? He strode across the room toward the stairs. He half expected Ron to stop him. He would even have liked Ron to throw a punch at him, but Ron just stood there in his two small pajamas, and Harry, having stormed upstairs, lay awake in bed fuming for a long time afterward and didn't hear him come up to bed. Boys will be boys, I suppose. This is an adolescent tempest in a teapot. This is the worst kind of high school drama, I suppose. And what's lovely about this is the observance of fine detail here, and then the resolution when it comes, and it will come at the end of the next chapter, no spoilers there, but when the resolution comes, it will be handled in a very perfunctory and swift manner. Rowling, I think, actually has, for all that our experience of these relationships may not be completely pleasant as readers, for all that we might become a little frustrated with this fractured power dynamic between our core trio, they work best when they are together, and it's no good when Hermione is off doing other things with a time turner or with the SPEW, and it's no good when Ron is off doing other things because he's mad at Harry, and it's no good when Harry is angry at one or either or both of them. These interruptions to the flow of the story can be a little wearing and a little aggravating, particularly for those of us who are no longer in high school and have long since grown weary of this kind of adolescent drama. But it is, I think, very well observed. It is, I think, very true to teenagers and to their experiences. Harry can't verbalize here what it is that he really feels. What is it that Harry really feels? He feels that he misses Ron. He should be able to tell Ron. Ron should have been standing next to him when Sirius Black appeared in the fireplace in the first place. That's where Ron belongs. Ron and Harry together, facing the world, facing this threat, facing this danger, facing these weird and bizarre and ever and increasingly life-threatening circumstances. But Ron wasn't there. Ron had turned against him, and Harry feels betrayed. That is why he hates him so powerfully. And I love the specific evocation of the detail of Ron's two small pajamas and how Harry loathes those specifically. Partly, of course, because they're just stupid, right? If you are wearing pajamas that are too small for you, if you're wearing any clothes that are too small for you, they just look stupid, particularly when you're a gawky adolescent boy in the presence of another gawky adolescent boy. This is just a symbol of anything that is ridiculous, right? If Ron had been wearing immaculately crafted and tailored pajamas, then Harry would have found something else. He would have been mad about the color of his hair or the slippers on his feet or whatever, how loud he was breathing. It doesn't matter. Harry would have found something to fixate upon. But brilliantly, the two small pajamas are indicative of this transition between childhood and adulthood. They are too small because Ron is going through a growth spurt. They are too small because Ron is growing up faster than his parents can provide him with new pajamas, impoverished as the Weasleys are. So while it is an incidental detail that Harry fixates on because Harry is mad, right? That's the chain of cause and effect there rather than the inverse being true. He's not angry at Ron because Ron is wearing two small pajamas. He's filled with hate and loathing at Ron's two small pajamas because he is already angry at him, because he has been betrayed by him, and he is terrified, and he is alone, and he is vulnerable, and he is separated and isolated, and those bonds have been cut. So it's beautifully observed in that regard, but also we get this play with this adolescent point of transition, right? Ron is literally standing there, the man in the boy's clothes, right? He is there, the adolescent in the child's clothes, and that just emphasizes the emotional intractability of this problem, right? There's just no way of getting through it. There's no way of getting to the heart of it until suddenly, of course, there is. And we have an epiphany that, of course, doesn't come from Harry. Is Harry being reasonable through this exchange? What do you guys think? Is Harry justified in his response to Ron at this point? Or is this... Okay. Possibility A. Harry is completely justified in his response to Ron. Ron is being the worst. Possibility B, Harry is not technically justified in his response to Ron, but we can understand it because of the enormous pressure that Harry is under, and this is just the flashpoint for all of those feelings and all of those emotions. C, Harry is wrong. Harry is not treating Ron responsibly. What do you guys think? Do you have a... Oh, Andrew asking, when did the badge change to Potter really stinks? It's really quite cute. Colin and Dennis Creevy are trying to hack the badges. They're trying to enchant the badges at the end of the last chapter to change them back to just be the Cedric Diggory badges, and they are so bad at it that they make it worse somehow. I love that. It's a really great detail. Between B and C, says Hannah. Lynn says B and C. Okay, so we're not thinking that B, says Nikki here. Let me see. Lady Zial says, no, he isn't being reasonable, but neither is Ron, and the impasse is the problem. Surging emotions and emotional maturity don't come at the same time. Beautifully put, Lady Zial. Absolutely right? The scope and volume of our emotions do not increase in linear proportion to our capability to handle greater and more complex emotions, right? We generally get a bucket load of emotions and then learn the coping tools after the fact. That seems to be pretty true of the adolescent experience. Rohit says, I really believe that Ron is being far less unreasonable here. Again, as I read this as an adult, I empathize a lot more with Ron and understand where he's coming from and place a lot more blame on Harry for this fight than I had before. Me too, though I have to say, reading it this time, I also place some blame at the feet of Hermione Granger, because I'm not sure to what degree her assessment of Ron's feelings in the last chapter were actually correct. She flat out tells Harry, no, Ron's jealous. Ron's jealous because it's always you and it's always special. And look, he has brothers at home and he's competing against them and he's always competing against you, except he can't really compete with you because you're the boy who lived and Lightning Scar and Firebolt and all of that cool stuff. Like, he's just jealous. And I'm not sure that that's true. And even if it is true, Hermione has not helped in that moment. Like, I understand that her intent is to help Harry. Her intent is to explain rationally to Harry. But while, as we were discussing last time, Hermione is left with a great deal of the emotional heavy lifting in the course of this book, she doesn't do it brilliantly. She doesn't really necessarily juggle all of those impulses as beautifully and as positively as she might. Yes. Good. Ladies Yell saying, I often still have conversations with my husband about how I know the logical answer and the way I should feel, but my logic and my emotions don't always go together. I am 29. I turn 40 in like 3 months and I'm still in that place. Every human being that I know is in that place. There's a constant pressure between that alchemical emotional response, which is influenced by so many myriad things, right? Things which we are consciously mindful of and subconsciously, dominated by, and things which would never occur to us in a million years, and expensive therapy. We are all, I think, products of that emotional maelstrom, of that emotional cocktail that is bubbling away within us. And yeah, trying to moderate that with a certain kind of rationality is strong, but also the denial of emotional reality. The denial of emotional reality, particularly with regard to, historically speaking, with regard to women and with regard to children, has been one of the tools of the patriarchy. You guys, like that, the claiming of the rationalistic high ground has been something that empowered men have done again and again and again throughout the course of human history. If you were just better, if you were just more calm, if you were just able to see the big picture, if you were able to think this through, then you would agree with me. But you're not, and that makes you crazy. Very problematic right there. Because we as human beings are not strictly rationalistic beings, right? We are also emotional beings. To deny that is to deny the truth of our humanity, of our individuality, of that riot and tumult of personal relationships and interpersonal relationships and art and creativity and storytelling and self-expression and all of the wonderful things which make us us. So many of those things are anchored in these indefinable and irreproducible alchemical emotional constructs within us, right? I think that we should aspire to rationality. I believe in the importance of logic and of reason, but not at the extent of what makes us human. And now I feel like I'm reciting a script from a 60s episode of Star Trek. Okay, let's push on into chapter 20. Now that I've spent the first 40 minutes catching up, let's push into tonight's reading, shall we? Let's talk about the first task. And now we're going to get the introduction of the simple spell, right? We've got the what Ron interrupted as Harry was talking to Sirius was the idea that there's a very simple spell which can solve his problem with the dragons. And I'll tell you what that is, Harry, in just a moment. Let me first draw breath. Let me pour a little snifter of whiskey. I'll just... okay, now I've gathered myself and we're sure that there won't be any interruptions. The answer to your problem is, oh no, Ron has interrupted me and now I definitely can't tell you. It's a decent enough cliffhanger that sets Harry on an interesting course because now he's in Hermione's town. He returned to the table with a pile of spellbooks, set them down and began to flick through each in turn, Hermione whispering non-stop at his elbow. Well, there are switching spells, but what's the point of switching it unless you swapped its fangs for wine gums or something that would make it less dangerous? The trouble is, like that book said, not much is going to get through a dragon's hide. I'd say transfigure it, but something that big, you really haven't got a hope. I doubt even Professor McGonagall, unless you're supposed to put the spell on yourself, maybe to give yourself extra powers, but they're not simple spells. I mean, we haven't done any of those in class. I only know about them because I've been doing OWL practice papers. Hermione, Harry said through gritted teeth, will you shut up for a bit, please? I'm trying to concentrate. But all that happened when Hermione fell silent was that Harry's brain filled with a sort of blank buzzing, which didn't seem to allow room for concentration. He stared hopelessly down the index of basic hexes for the busy and vexed. Instant scalping, but dragons had no hair. Pepper breath, that would probably increase a dragon's firepower. Horn tongue, just what he needed to give it an extra weapon. Oh no, he's back again. Why can't he read on his stupid ship? Said Hermione irritably as Victor Crumb slouched in, cast a surly look over at the pair of them, then settled himself in a distant corner with a pile of books. Come on, Harry, we'll go back to the common room. His fan club will be here in a moment, twittering away. And sure enough, as they left the library, a gang of girls tiptoed past them, one of them wearing a Bulgaria scarf tied around her waist. How awfully fashionable. How fashion-forward of these Hogwarts girls, these unnamed Hogwarts girls, to be wearing a Bulgaria scarf tied loosely around their waist. How very continental. I'm thrilled at the evolution of fashion here at Hogwarts. This is another one of these passages that does not make me like Harry that much. He asks for Hermione's help. He goes onto Hermione's turf. The library might as well be called the Hermione Granger Library for being awesome, right? And while he's there, she's doing the work. She's running through all the possibilities. She's taking the Ravenclaw approach. Okay, possibility A. No, scratch that. That's not going to work. Possibility B. And she's running down the list of things that they might be able to do in order to, wait, why are we? Oh, to save Harry's life from a dragon. Of course, that's why we're here. To make sure that he survives the first test in the oftentimes fatal Triwizard Tournament. And Harry grumbles at her. Hermione, Harry said through gritted teeth, will you shut up for a bit, please? I'm trying to concentrate. And even then, of course, when she is quiet and Harry can't concentrate, he doesn't say, I'm sorry, Hermione, please continue. He doesn't say, I'm sorry, I'm on edge. He doesn't have that emotional sophistication yet either. So what are we going to do? I love Hermione's approach here. The switching spells. Switching spells are pretty straightforward. That could work. Transfiguration isn't simple or straightforward, and you are definitely not powerful enough to do it. Cast a spell on yourself, maybe to give yourself extra powers. They're not simple spells. I've talked before about the ways in which, for all that magic is magic in the world of Harry Potter, what it really is a kind of applied science. The study of magic is more like the study of math or chemistry or physics than the study of magic usually is, right? Compare and contrast the treatment of magic in the aforementioned Narnia books by C.S. Lewis or the aforementioned, Middle-earth books by J.R.R. Tolkien, and you'll find something very different. This is very much the kind of 17th and 18th century natural philosophers' approach to science. If you science it hard enough, it will turn into magic. And if you magic it hard enough, it will turn into science. And that seems to be what Hermione is suggesting here. She's absolutely confirming this notion that we've had already, that there are just hierarchies of spells and endless lists of spells. One of my favorite book titles that we get from J.K. Rowling, actually, Basic Hexes for the Busy and Vexed, is a very good book title. I'm very, very fond of that. But it's just an index of spells. What is your education at Hogwarts that isn't just go and read all the books in the library, study all of the spells and learn how to cast them? Well, because there's more to it than that. It's all about the why of the spell casting and about being connected in a sense to deeper and more mystical forces that actually seem to have nothing to do with magic itself, right? I've been thinking a lot about this as we've been moving forward and looking at the things that Harry studies. I've been thinking about this in the context of Defense Against the Dark Arts, of course, and our ongoing discussion about Defense Against the Dark Arts versus the Dark Arts. What was Gilderoy Lockhart teaching them? Really, how representative of a Dada syllabus was that? What about Remus Lupin when he is introducing them to the Boggart and all of the other magical creatures that he challenges them with through the course of the year? How close to a standard Dada syllabus is that? Is there such a thing as a standard Dada syllabus? What are they doing at Durmstrang? What are they doing at Beauxbaton, for goodness sake? We have no idea about the Beauxbaton response to dark magic at this point. What does the Dada class do? Like, what is it ultimately for? And that got me thinking about the other classes and the ways in which the other classes, many of the other classes, plunge through magic as it is presented to us at Hogwarts into something deeper, into something more elemental. And I'm thinking of the herbology classes and looking at growing things and drawing personal connections with mandrake roots and flutterby bushes and all of the other things that we associate with that class. Similarly, care of magical creatures, right? Magical creatures and herbology, very similar classes in that regard. We get Professor Trelawney's divination class where, yes, she is presented as a comedic figure, absolutely, but also she is perceiving something or claiming to perceive something or seeking to perceive something or claiming that a greater thing can be perceived, perhaps, than magic. Magic is the tool there, right? Magic is not the universal constant. Magic is not the universal truth. Magic is the tool that allows you to approach the universal constant, allows you to approach the universal truth, no, the universal constant there in the broadest philosophical sense of a foundational truth. That may be the case. I need to think more about this. If you have thoughts on this, you can email me directly, pointnorthmedia@gmail.com, or head on over to the Point North Forum at pointnorthmedia.com/forum. I didn't mention at the top of tonight's session, the website is back. We have a shiny new website. I'm sorry for the delay in last week's podcast because the whole architecture of the website had to be pulled apart and reconstructed, but now it has been. Last week's podcast hit the feed, I think, on Friday. There'll be no more delay with this one. Everything should be back on our regular schedule, and I'm very glad of it, let me tell you. Let's keep pushing onward. I want to get ahead to Harry telling Cedric about the dragon. But first of all, I didn't want to pull the whole slide for this. I just wanted to observe it and note it as a piece of evidence with regard to Harry's developing emotional maturity and the degree to which Harry has been inconstant in his affections for Hogwarts in the course of this book. So we have that beat right before the end of the summer holidays where he's completely ambivalent about returning to Hogwarts. Like, he's not enthused about returning to Hogwarts because he's having such a good time with the Weasleys. In fact, specifically that he's having such a good time with the Weasleys. Let's remember that as we study this next. I wish I had put this on the slide now. I'm sorry for this. You'll just have to put up with me reading it to you. Harry barely slept that night. When he awoke on Monday morning, he seriously considered for the first time ever just running away from Hogwarts. But as he looked around the great hall at breakfast time and thought about what leaving the castle would mean, he knew he couldn't do it. It was the only place he had ever been happy. Well, he supposed he must have been happy with his parents too, but he couldn't remember that. So Harry begins this book with mixed feelings about Hogwarts. He comes back to Hogwarts and we get the decidedly non-magical and non-special, return to Hogwarts, right? As they come through the rain and have Peeves pelting them with water balloons and that whole experience. And then the announcement of the Triwizard Tournament and so on and so forth. Harry's just not terribly enthused. And then even as we get into his regular class schedule again, he's bored. He's contemptuous in that familiar way of life at Hogwarts. But now that his life is once more being challenged, he's changed his mind, actually. This is the only place he's ever been happy, and he can't imagine ever, ever, ever running away from it. This is the only place he's ever been happy. Does present a problem to me because I do not believe that is true. I do not believe that is true even within the very recent frame of Harry's experience. He was very happy at the Burrow, right? We were all very happy at the Burrow, Harry. Why are you saying this? Why are you doing this? Hogwarts here, though, is representative of something more, of something greater, of something grander, and it is that community. Harry is now mindful of this community that has, in some sense, been taken away from him, personally, in the body of Ron, impersonally, in the body of the rest of the student body, and now possibly permanently in the body of Harry's body, right? He could lose his life in the first challenge, facing down these terrifying dragons, and that's making him reappraise what he's going through. Let's get to a great moment of heroism. Well, okay, I'm going to assert that. You guys can discuss this in the chat if you like. A great moment of heroism, ? For Harry. Oh, I'm sorry, I've gone backwards in my slides. That's no good. There it is. "Hi," said Cedric, picking up a copy of a guide to advanced transfiguration that was now splattered with ink. "My bag just split, brand new and all." "Cedric," said Harry, "the first task is dragons." "What?" said Cedric, looking up. "Dragons," said Harry, speaking quickly, in case Professor Flitwick came out to see where Cedric had got to. "They've got 4, one for each of us, and we've got to get past them." Cedric stared at him. Harry saw some of the panic he'd been feeling since Saturday night flickering in Cedric's grey eyes. "Are you sure?" Cedric said in a hushed voice. "Dead sure," said Harry. "I've seen them." "But how did you find out? We're not supposed to know." "Never mind," said Harry quickly. He knew Hagrid would be in trouble if he told the truth. "But I'm not the only one who knows. Fleur and Crumb will know by now. Maxime and Karkaroff both saw the dragons too." Cedric straightened up, his arms full of inky quills, parchment, and books, his ripped bag dangling off one shoulder. He stared at Harry, and there was a puzzled, almost suspicious look in his eyes. "Why are you telling me?" he asked. Harry looked at him in disbelief. He was sure Cedric wouldn't have asked that if he'd seen the dragons himself. Harry wouldn't have let his worst enemy face those monsters unprepared. Well, perhaps Malfoy or Snape. "It's just fair, isn't it?" he said to Cedric. "We all know now. We're on an even footing, aren't we?" Let's talk about the actual philosophy of this, the virtue of this, in just a moment. First, the Diffindo spell that Harry uses in order to cleave, I suppose, Cedric's bag. It comes from the Latin first-person active indicative. How's that? To split, to cleave, or to open. This is the first of 4 uses of this spell by Harry in the entire series. This is the first appearance of the spell. It is the first of 4 uses by Harry himself. It will be also used by other characters. It is, in fact, going to be used by Ron in the very near future. It is, in fact, going to be used by Ron in next week's reading, ? Possibly next week's reading or the following week. I don't remember exactly where that falls in the narrative, but it's going to be used in the very near future. Anyway, why are you telling me? He asked. Harry looked at him in disbelief. He was sure Cedric wouldn't have asked that if he'd seen the dragons himself. Harry wouldn't have let his worst enemy face those monsters unprepared. Well, perhaps Malfoy or Snape. It's just fair, isn't it? He said to Cedric. We all know now we're on an even footing, aren't we? You'll note, I'm sure, that the narrative suggests one explanation for why Harry is telling Cedric the truth at this point, and Harry suggests another explanation. And that these 2 explanations are by no means mutually exclusive. Both of these can be true. Both of these will certainly inform one another. But they are distinct. They are different. Harry looked at him in disbelief, right? So first off, Cedric says, why are you telling me? And it has not occurred to Harry at this point that Cedric will not believe him or that Cedric will be in any way suspicious. Harry says, are you sure? Cedric said in a hushed voice. Dead sure. I've seen them. But how did you find out? We're not supposed to know. Never mind, said Harry. It couldn't possibly matter less, Cedric, how I know this super secret thing that I'm now telling you. But I do, so you should trust me. And it doesn't occur to Harry that Cedric won't trust him. And partly we might speculate that's because Harry is used to being believed when he says things. I mean, not about big, important school or life-threatening things. Generally speaking, we don't believe him about those things until, the beginning of June, that kind of time in the school year. But used to, in general, being believed about significant things of this proportion? Absolutely. Which may well be, by the way, why Ron's refusal to believe him or inability to believe him hurts as much as it does. It's also possible that he believes Cedric Diggory will believe him about the dragons because he's Cedric Diggory and he is trusting and open-hearted and Hufflepuffian about the whole thing. So it doesn't occur to Harry in the first place that he's not going to be believed. He looked at him in disbelief. He was sure Cedric wouldn't have asked that if he had seen the dragons himself. Harry wouldn't have let his worst enemy face those monsters unprepared. Okay, the dragons are so terrifying that I have to tell anyone who is going to face them what they are up against. This is the moral imperative. They are so dangerous that I would not let my worst enemy, brackets, well, Malfoy, Snape, but, probably even Crabbe and Goyle. Like Crabbe and Goyle, I would probably tell about this. Even Ron, right now, I would probably tell about the dragons. That is the moral imperative. These things are so dangerous, it is moral, it is necessary for me to communicate this information and to give you a fighting chance. That is one possible explanation. That is the internal explanation that Harry gives us at this point. That's the explanation that the narrative gives us. But then when he talks to Cedric, he says, it's just fair, isn't it? We all know now we're on an even footing, aren't we? Which suggests that, Cedric, I've got something to tell you. The first task is going to be Chihuahuas. Well, it's only fair that I told you that I tell you this because I had additional information. Fleur and Crumb. I love, by the way, that it's Fleur first name and Crumb last name. Like that very much. Just a little subtle distancing there from, well, not so much a subtle distancing from Victor Crumb as it is a certain increasing proximity to Fleur Delacour there. I kind of like that as a detail. It's just fair, isn't it? He said to Cedric, we all know now we're on an even footing. So it has nothing to do, actually, Harry, with the tremendous threat, with the horned, scaled, fire-breathing monsters that you just saw and now want to warn Cedric about. It's not actually about the fact that they're dangerous. What it is about fairness. What it is recognizing here, and this ties back to what I was talking about before, about wizards oftentimes seeking to subvert the rules, oftentimes seeking to challenge the status quo. But what's interesting about good wizards is that they will often do so in a way that speaks to the spirit of the law rather than the letter of the law. And that is what Harry's doing now. There is a rule in place that says that we cannot give the champions of the Triwizard Tournament any information about the challenges so that the challenges will be fair. Now that Harry knows that he, Fleur, and Victor all have information, he feels obliged, he feels compelled to share that information with Cedric so that it remains fair. He is honoring, in a sense, the spirit of the law there. Rayla Lynn, this is very good. Rayla Lynn says, I think part of why Harry chose to tell Cedric is his loneliness. He wants a pleasant interaction, especially with someone who's going through a similar experience. I completely agree with that, thinking in particular of the couple of exchanges that we get, the very brief, like half smile exchange that we get right before the first task, and then the well played exchange that we get right after the task. Yes, camaraderie between Cedric and Harry here is a little strained, understandably strained, I think, but still warm and authentic and genuine. And you're absolutely right, Rayla Lynn. I think that this shared adversity is bringing all of these people together. Right? We're going to see this with the other champions too as we get forward. Oh no, this is really interesting. Hannah calls out here, crediting. Let me see. Hannah crediting Heroes and Bards. I can try and scroll back and find the original comment, but I fear that if I do... oh no, here it is. Heroes and Bards says, I always thought it was kind of sexist they refer to the boys by the last names, but Fleur by her first name. Gosh, is that consistent throughout? I suppose most of the Hogwarts student body is referred to by their full name, right? The less well-known kids are generally referred to by their full names. It's only those students who have been pretty close to the core narrative that we honor with the use of a single first name, right? I'm thinking of even Lavender Brown, right? We generally refer to her by her first name, Hannah Abbott. Yeah, generally speaking, we go full name at Hogwarts. I'm trying to think of instances in which we have drawn exactly that distinction. That is a really interesting distinction, and you're absolutely right that, again, historically speaking, and this was the point that Hannah was pulling out here. Hannah says, Fleur and Crumb, professional women often get called by their first names rather than their titles. I agree with Heroes, background sexism bleeding through. That honestly had not occurred to me. But yes, I mean, you're absolutely right that is an extant problem or an ongoing issue. It's one of those examples of institutionalized misogyny and institutionalized, even if it's not presented in a misogynistic context, it is still a means of socially othering entire communities, of limiting spheres of capability and spheres of agency. It's pretty unpleasant. You're absolutely right that occurs in the real world. I hadn't noticed it happening consistently through the book, but you may well be right. I'll be paying a lot more attention to that. Yes. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, C-Star says, I'm thinking of Draco Malfoy introducing Harry to his friends as Crabbe and Goyle, signifying a normalization of peers calling each other by their last name. That is exactly right. But that is, of course, also inverted because Draco Malfoy is the bad guy. And I'm trying to think. I'm trying to rack my brain to think to see if I can think of particular instances of Ron and Hermione consistently being referred to by Harry or by characters who are very close to the POV of the novel as Weasley and Granger, respectively. And I think that generally speaking, we only do that in times of adversity. Generally speaking, we only draw a distinction or a disparity there when we are dealing with a bad guy, when we are dealing with an antagonist. And also, of course, Minerva McGonagall, for example, refers to everyone by their last name, but often appends it with a Mr. or a Miss and is completely, equitable in that regard. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. Huh. I'm going to be thinking about that a lot now. I'm going to be thinking about that a great deal. Thanks for that. Yes. Matt Miller says, by contrast, I think he says Crumb because that's how he knew him during the Quidditch World Cup. That is also fair, I think, right? That he also, right, because there's some speculation here. Rayla Lynn says, I never thought of it like that. I assumed they called her Fleur like Cher or Beyonce, which if anyone's going to have that singular name, it's going to be Fleur, right? That's possible. Also, Crumb is kind of known by that singular first name. We get that chant back at the Quidditch World Cup. So yeah, there are other things going on. It's not definitive, but there certainly is applicability with some troubling tendencies in the in the real world. Yes, good. All right, let me see here. Okay. So we are interrupted by Mad-Eye Moody, who hustles Harry off to his office, to the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor's office, where we get that lovely little beat of Harry remembering what this office was like back when Gilderoy Lockhart inhabited it, and it was full of, winking finger gun pictures of Gilderoy Lockhart, and then when Remus Lupin inhabited it, and it was full of weird animals that he was going to just bring to class, I suppose, just a jam-packed dark menagerie there in the Dada office, and now, of course, it's Mad-Eye Moody's office, so it is just jammed full of, 1970s hacker spyware gear. So, all right, said Moody, sitting down and stretching out his wooden leg with a groan. Cheating's a traditional part of the Triwizard Tournament and always has been. I didn't cheat, said Harry sharply. It was a sort of accident that I found out. Moody grinned. I wasn't accusing you, laddie. I've been telling Dumbledore from the start he can be as high-minded as he likes, but you can bet old Karkaroff and Maxime won't be.
They'll have told their champions everything they can. They want to win. They want to beat Dumbledore. They like to prove he's only human.
Moody gave another harsh laugh, and his magical eyes swiveled around so fast it made Harry feel uneasy to watch it.
So, got any ideas how you're going to get past your dragon yet?
Said Moody. No, said Harry.
Well, I'm not going to tell you, said Moody gruffly. I don't show favoritism, me. I'm just going to give you some good general advice, and the first bit is play to your strengths.
I haven't got any, said Harry before he could stop himself.
Excuse me, growled Moody. You've got strengths if I say you've got them. Think. Now, what are you best at?
Harry tried to concentrate. What was he best at? Well, that was easy, really. Quidditch, he said dully, and a fat lot of help.
That's right, said Moody,
staring at him very hard, his magical eye barely moving at all.
You're a damn good flyer, from what I've heard.
Yeah, but... Harry stared at him. I'm not allowed a broom. I've only got my wand.
My second piece of general advice, said Moody, loudly interrupting him, is to use a nice, simple spell that will enable you to get what you need.
Cheating's a part of the Triwizard Tournament. I don't know what to make of this. I don't know what to... I don't know when to stop unpicking the layers of this, right? First of all, of course, Moody knows about the dragons. Moody knows exactly how Harry knows about the dragons. There's no opacity here to Harry's scheming. Hagrid's identity is not a secret from Mad-Eye Moody. Mad-Eye Moody was literally right there when Hagrid told him to come out to the woods wearing his invisibility cloak. So Mad-Eye Moody knows exactly what has happened. And yet here he's preserving this semblance of propriety, right? This is I'm not going to tell you, I don't show favoritism, me. Just some good general advice here from Mad-Eye Moody, which is definitely not specific about the challenge that Harry is about to face. Just some general life advice here. And yet, all of that is completely fine. All of that is completely consistent, right? He's the renegade Auror who doesn't play by the rules, but he gets results, you stupid chief, right? This is Mad-Eye Moody all over. Except he's also critical of Maxime and Karkaroff for being engaged in exactly the kind of subterfuge in which he is now himself engaged. I wasn't accusing you, laddie, right? I didn't cheat, said Harry sharply. It was a sort of accident that I found out. It was a sort of accident. I tripped and stumbled into the Forbidden Forest wearing my cloak and saw a bunch of dragons. And then told Cedric about them. All an accident. Terrible circumstance. Can't believe it happened. Moody grinned. I wasn't accusing you, laddie. No, come on. Let us not do this, you and I, Harry. We know what is going on here. I've been telling Dumbledore from the start he can be as high-minded as he likes, but you can bet old Karkaroff and Maxime won't be. They'll have told their champions everything they can. They want to win. They want to beat Dumbledore. They'd like to prove he's only human. So they want to bring Dumbledore down. This is not, as far as Moody is concerned, about school pride. This is about a personal antagonism between the heads of the three schools. This is a personal contest. And of course, he's going to see it in personal contest terms because he is, well, a former Auror, because he is Mad-Eye Moody, because he has this personal relationship with Karkaroff, and because he has been brought out of retirement by his personal relationship with Dumbledore. For Mad-Eye Moody, at this point in his life, and possibly forever in his life, it has all been about personal relationships. And I'm aware, even as I'm saying this, that of course, when we're talking about Mad-Eye Moody, we're talking about two individuals. We're talking about the presentation of Mad-Eye Moody and the actuality of Mad-Eye Moody, but that is true for both. Neither of their experiences is about cleanly delineated sides. Neither of them know where the battlefield is or which armies are being drawn up or what the fight is going to look like, and it doesn't matter. It is all about the individual personality. So this is completely true, I would take, at least explicitly true of the interior Moody at this point, and by implication, and pretty consistent implication, true of the exterior Moody too. So this is his reasoning. He says, I've told Dumbledore from the start, you by all means be high-minded. You by all means obey the rules of the Triwizard Tournament. Parenthetically, just a moment ago I said cheating's a traditional part of the Triwizard Tournament and always has been. Okay, so it is understood that when the Triwizard Tournament takes place, there will be a certain amount of cheating. Fair enough. That, by the way, pretty consistent with our sense of the wizarding world, right? Like a fair amount of sleight of hand and that kind of you can cheat as much as you like as long as you don't get caught, that does actually seem to be pretty consistent with our perspective on, at the very least, life at Hogwarts. Now, previously, in the first couple of books, we've been able to frame that as, and that's part of the great British adventure school, British adventure boarding school story, right? That's part of that narrative tradition. But now, through Azkaban in particular, it now seems as though, no, that's actually just a part of the wizarding world. So Moody acknowledges that cheating is a traditional part of the Triwizard Tournament, acknowledges that he has had this conversation with Dumbledore, acknowledges that Maxime and Karkaroff, he believes, are going to be cheating flagrantly, not just to secure victory for their chosen champions, but to bring Dumbledore down, to humble Dumbledore, to, if you will, Humbledore. No, I don't like that at all, actually. All of which is fine. Right? All of which is actually a pretty cohesive philosophical perspective on this. No, this is garbage. We're going to fight dirty. That's what we do. But then we still have this weird performative pretense. We still have this lip service to the rules themselves. There is nothing stopping him from saying, Harry, you're a fantastic flyer. Why don't you just summon your firebolt and that'll help you take out the dragon, right? Or here's a small vial of dragon poison. Or here's a replica golden egg or something. I don't know. Some kind of magical something that he can give him that will just work, that will just be devastatingly effective in this context. No, instead, he leads Harry down the garden path. He leads Harry by prompting to the inevitable conclusion. The first bit is play to your strengths. My second piece of general advice is to use a nice simple spell that will enable you to get what you need. All of this takes us to, Eric is saying, given that it's known you can cheat as long as you don't get caught cheating, what happens if you do get caught? Based on the rules, you're in a binding contract to finish the competition, so what would happen? Well, presumably what would happen is that you would simply score 0 points, right? Presumably, the penalty for being caught cheating, the penalty for, at this point, breaking the magical contract within the bounds of the Triwizard Tournament for the champions of the Triwizard Tournament would be shame, would be public ridicule, would be something kind of, you'd be splashed across the front page of the Daily Prophet, that's for sure, right? Rita Skeeter would write the most devastating expose of her career on you at that point. I'm not sure that there are other potential ramifications. I just don't know what the magical contract is. On the one hand, I kind of wish that the magical contract were more developed a plot element in the story. On the other, I'm just not confident that it could be made to work. I'm just not confident that there's enough juice there. I feel as though the scaffolding that we would need to put in place to make the magical contract work would take too much time, would cost too much reader energy, would cause the book to be bogged down. But yeah, unfortunately, see, we've got a rich history in fairy tale storytelling of those kinds of compulsions being put upon someone, of significant quests, of, the placing of a geas upon someone, right? Placing a magical obligation upon someone. We can absolutely do that within the frame of Harry Potter. It just needs to be specific in that regard, and it's not. It's really not. Yeah. Oh, interesting. Recyclops says, the general implication should be that the Triwizard Tournament is our introduction to wizarding geopolitics, in which rules and cheating are built in and expected. Yes, absolutely right. That's absolutely right, Recyclops. I think that when we're talking about the structure of the Triwizard Tournament itself, particularly in its international relations, isn't diplomacy fun, difficult kind of intramural competitive thing, right? Like all of those elements crashing into each other. Yeah. We should be thinking of modern geopolitics, right? We should be thinking of the UN. We should be thinking of the EU, certainly. We should be thinking of these points of compromise and contrast, and the truth that the perceived victory is almost always more important than the actual victory. It is not true that we are defined by how we play the game, but it is true that we are defined by how we are seen to play the game. More on that when we get to the scoring for the first task. I think It Don't Connect was just asking me how many more slides I've got, and you guys, it's a number. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 slides, maybe 8, 7 or 8 slides. So, okay, we've got 25 minutes left to do this. Let's see what we can do to get through it. We have to, first of all, though, talk about the summoning charm. there's a little controversy here over the pronunciation of this particular charm, this particular word. The UK audiobooks, the Stephen Fry audiobooks, use Axio. So like drawing from accelerate or accent, where we have that double C being representative of both the hard and the soft C sound. So Stephen Fry gives us Axio. Jim Dale in the US version gives us Asio, which I don't like at all. I don't think that there is a... Okay, now I'm doing this in the middle of a podcast and I really wish I'd given it some thought beforehand. But honestly, you guys, the only double C word that I can think of, which we pronounce as a soft S, would be flaccid. And I'm not sure that that's what we're going for with Asio. There must be others, but none are springing to mind right now. So I kind of reject that one out of hand. I suppose it is also possible to take that Italian double C construction and to have it be accio, have it be, double C as in cappuccino, for example, right? So accio. But for me, the pronunciation is actually pretty clear. This word comes from the Latin word meaning I call or I summon, or interestingly, kind of I act or I take action would be like the development of that. But I call or I summon. And of course, in Latin, all C's are hard C's. So this is accio. That should be the pronunciation. Accio firebolt, accio coffee, whatever you want to summon forth to you. I don't mind other pronunciations. And it's not just that I want to be a stickler for Latin pronunciation in particular. As I've said before, my Latin is nothing like as good as it should be. But given that our pronunciations have generally been, in the context of spells and magic in the Harry Potter series so far, they've kind of reliably used that degenerate Latinate form. So I think accio is where I'm going to go. What do you guys think? Accio, according to Rowling, says Nikki. When I heard the hard C in the movie, I was so confused, says Alispin. I love accio, and I'm going to use it now, says Lady Zial. Good. Oh, Alispin says, yeah, when I first read the books, I said accio in my head too. Yeah, good. Excellent. In ecclesiastical Latin, said Father John, it would be accio. So you kind of do the compound Latin Italian. Yeah, that's really interesting. Yes, good. Oh, yes. Joseph says, always defer to Stephen Fry version over Jim Dale. I'm inclined to agree in this instance. I think Jim Dale I think Accio is my least favorite. Axio and accio are pretty even for me. I kind of like both of those, but accio, yeah, is where we are. So, accio, the Latin word meaning I call or I summon or I act or I take action. This is the root of the summoning spell, which of course we are going to use a billion times, and which you may recall we have already used. We already know about the summoning charm because we saw Molly Weasley use it all the way back at the beginning of the book as she is divesting Fred and George of their illegitimate possessions. She's accioing things left and right back then. Okay. Let's keep moving forward because I am already running out of time. We now start preparing for the first test. We transition out. Harry has this brilliant experience of fragmented time where he is suspended watching the clock that is dragging by, and then all of a sudden it's lunchtime. Then all of a sudden it's the evening. Time is now just falling apart for him as he is so fixated on the, imminent mortal peril of the first test of 3 in the Triwizard Tournament. Then finally Minerva McGonagall comes and ushers him down, gives him a little pep talk in her brilliant Minerva McGonagall way. See, when I talk about characters in the Harry Potter books, there are some characters that I always refer to by their full names, and Minerva McGonagall is oftentimes one of them, right? I like that quite a lot. I know that's not related to the discussion of how we refer to children at this school, but I like it nonetheless. Fleur Delacour was sitting in a corner on a low wooden stool. She didn't look nearly as composed as usual, but rather pale and clammy. Victor Crumb looked even surlier than usual, which Harry supposed was his way of showing nerves. Cedric was pacing up and down. When Harry entered, Cedric gave him a small smile, which Harry returned, feeling the muscles in his face working rather hard, as though they'd forgotten how to do it. "Harry! Good-o!" said Bagman happily, looking around at him. Come in, make yourself at home." Bagman looked somehow like a slightly overblown cartoon figure standing amid all the pale-faced champions. He was wearing his old wasp robes again. "Well, now we're all here, time to fill you in," said Bagman brightly. "When the audience is assembled, I'm going to be offering each of you this bag." He held up a small sack of purple silk and shook it at them, "from which you will each select a small model of the thing you're about to face. There are different varieties, you see, and I have to tell you something else too. Yes, your task is to collect the golden egg." Harry glanced around. Cedric had nodded once to show that he understood Bagman's words, and then started pacing around the tent again. He looked slightly green. Fleur Delacour and Crumb hadn't reacted at all. Perhaps they thought they might be sick if they opened their mouths. That was certainly how Harry felt. But they, at least, had volunteered for this. And in no time at all, hundreds upon hundreds of pairs of feet could be heard passing the tent, their owners talking excitedly, laughing, joking. Harry felt as separate from the crowd as though they were a different species. And then, it seemed like about a second later to Harry, Bagman was opening the neck of the purple silk sack. "Ladies first," he said, offering it to Fleur Delacour. Harry felt as separate from the crowd as though they were a different species, excuse me. And isn't this Harry's experience? Isn't this always true of Harry's experience? It has now been formalized. It has now been recognized. And now, weirdly, for all that he is more isolated than ever from his school, he has found companionship. He has found comrades. He has found fellow students, not of his school necessarily, not of his exceptional skill, exceptional bravery, exceptional position in society, certainly not of his celebrity, with the possible exception of Victor Crumb, but he has found fellow students who are now facing the same challenges that he is. He is isolated from his school, but he is unified with the other champions. They are now together. I love that little beat. Cedric was pacing up and down when Harry entered. Cedric gave him a small smile, which Harry returned, feeling the muscles in his face working rather hard as though they'd forgotten how to do it. That little moment of connection, that moment of comradeship there between Harry and Cedric is really great, actually. And I like, too, how we get, I'm looking now, of course, I'm paying very close attention to the names. Crumb described, credited as Crumb just once by his surname there, otherwise we get full names. It's interesting. Cedric gets just his first name. Fleur gets her whole name every time she's mentioned in this passage. Yeah, every time she's mentioned in this passage. That's fascinating. I'm going to be spending a lot of time thinking about this, you guys. A lot of time. So we get Ludo Bagman and his effusiveness. And of course, he is presented as being vibrant, as being cartoonish here in his comedic old wasp Quidditch robes, right? He is unlike the champions because the champions are unlike Ludo Bagman. They are unlike everyone else outside. They are unlike anyone else in the wizarding world at this point because they have been specially selected. They have been specially appointed. This is new for Cedric. For all we know, this is new for Fleur. Not entirely new for Victor, and God knows not new for Harry. We've got a full range of experience here, right? Cedric's, well, I suppose with the exception of his Quidditch victory last year, Cedric's never really been in the limelight the way that Harry has, and certainly never been in the limelight the way that they are all about to be in the limelight. So Ludo Bagman leads Harry outside. He offers him some help. Again, really applying some firm pressure there to the bounds of what is acceptable or unacceptable behavior, acceptable or unacceptable conduct here. Ludo all but offering his outright assistance to Harry at this point, assuring him that no one would know at that point too, but Harry declines, telling Bagman A, that he is fine, and then B, wondering internally why he keeps telling people that he is fine when he clearly isn't. So Cedric and Fleur and Victor all succeed in their challenges. We're going to get the recap of that later. We get this great sequence as Harry is sitting in the tent, again, becoming more isolated, right? As they go out one by one to face the challenge, and he's there alone, waiting for his turn here. It's really powerful stuff. And then he steps up. He stood up, noticing dimly that his legs seemed to be made of marshmallow. He waited, and then he heard the whistle blow. He walked out through the entrance of the tent, the panic rising into a crescendo inside him, and now he was walking past the trees through a gap in the enclosure fence. He saw everything in front of him as though it were a very highly colored dream. There were hundreds and hundreds of faces staring down at him from the stands that had been magic there since he'd last stood on this spot. And there was the Horntail, and at the other end of the enclosure, crouched low over her clutch of eggs, her wings half furled, her evil yellow eyes upon him, a monstrous, scaly, black lizard, thrashing her spiked tail, leaving yard-long gouge marks in the hard ground. The crowd was making a great deal of noise, but whether friendly or not, Harry didn't know or care. It was time to do what he had to do, to focus his mind entirely and absolutely upon the thing that was his only chance. He raised his wand. "Accio Firebolt!" he shouted. Harry waited, every fibre of him hoping, praying. If it hadn't worked, if it wasn't coming, he seemed to be looking at everything around him through some sort of shimmering, transparent barrier like a heat haze, which made the enclosure and the hundreds of faces around him swim strangely. I love the power of the writing here. I love the evocation of the enclosure, of Harry's experience, of the focal point of Harry's experience here, not the crowd. Despite Ron's allegations, despite even, I suppose, some insinuations from Gilderoy Lockhart back in the second book. Harry doesn't care that much about celebrity. He is not looking at the crowd, let alone playing to the crowd. He isn't even conscious of the crowd's response, or conscious of the crowd's response, but not conscious of the tone or tenor of the crowd's response. He doesn't know whether it is friendly or not, and he doesn't care, because now he is Harry Potter. Now he is focused. The world compresses into this fine point of detail. It was time to do what he had to do, to focus his mind entirely and absolutely upon the thing that was his only chance. Then he casts the charm and is again suspended. Harry waited, every fiber of him hoping, praying. If it hadn't worked, if it wasn't coming, we don't finish those thoughts. The fragments of thoughts are left hanging there, because that is where Harry's mind is. We get this idea, he's looking at everything around him through some sort of shimmering, transparent barrier like a heat haze. There's this focal, rippling energy around him. And then, of course, the firebolt. And then we get a couple of pages of Quidditch adventure and of Harry taking to the air. And we get that brilliant beat as he finally takes to the air, when all of his worry falls away, when all of his fear falls away, when suddenly he is back in his element. He knows this. This is just another game of Quidditch, as he says. Suddenly, the world is rendered in terms that he can understand. And it's very easy, I think, because we're moving so swiftly through this chapter. We are here in Dear Mr. Potter are moving swiftly through this chapter, but also the book itself is moving with a great propulsive force through this chapter. It's easy to miss this. But the specter of this first task, even though Harry is facing the Hungarian horntail here, even though he is facing absolutely the most dangerous of the four dragons, the specter of this, the threat of this, the looming, gloomy presence of this was worse than the reality of this. Harry was falling under fear. He was falling under despair. His hope had been taken from him, and he had been left with something not entirely dissimilar to the coldness and the isolation and the stark severity of the presence of the Dementors back in the last book. Harry's isolation there is emotional. Here it is much more physical, but he's feeling the consequence in a very similar way. And that fear is still contributing to that isolation, not to the actuality of his isolation, but to the sensation, the experience of his isolation, I suppose. Yeah. Fears, as Father John observes with great wisdom here in the Crowdcast chat, fears are often worse than the reality. Yes, they are. And when there's that awful threat of something hanging over you that you just, you would do anything to avoid it, and then you are dragged into facing it, kicking and screaming, and actually, it's not that bad, because actually, once you take action, you are literally empowered. You are robbed of power by inactivity. Action does empower you and allows you to face whatever challenge it is a little more fully realized. Yeah. Chris asks rather brilliantly, could Harry have summoned anything? Does it have to belong to him? Does he have to know where it is? I was wondering about this, because we get the great scene where Harry is practicing in the common room with Hermione, and it's 2:00 in the morning or whatever, and he's accio-ing the dictionary across the room. He's obviously thinking of it, right? But dictionary is not a specific word. I'm reminded of our study of A Wizard of Earthsea and the true name of things, right? If he had known the true name of that particular dictionary, then I would have had no trouble whatsoever with him accio-ing it to his hand. But as it is, there seems to be, a focal component here. You'll notice that he doesn't summon any other firebolt. This is his firebolt that he summons from who knows where, apparently a great distance. I'm also reminded of, Thor extending his hand and just waiting for Mjolnir to catch up with him in the recent crop of Marvel movies. A joke that has now been played, I think, 3 times in 3 different films. I think we've gone back to that 3 times in 3 different films. So maybe we're probably done with that for reasons which will be clear to you if you've seen Thor Ragnarok, for example, if you've seen the brief engagement between Hela and Mjolnir in that movie. Anyway, I can't get distracted talking about the MCU. I've got a whole different podcast for doing that thing. Hey, check out the Excelsior podcast over at commonroomradio.com. All right, let's keep moving on. I've got just a couple more minutes. Let's see if... Actually, okay, we've only got two slides left from this chapter. So let's finish this chapter up, and we'll do the House Elf Liberation Front, from which the entirety of the chapter I pulled 3 slides. So we'll cover that very quickly at the beginning of next week's session. Look at that! Bagman was yelling. Will you look at that? Our youngest champion is quickest to get his egg. Well, this is going to shorten the odds on Mr. Potter. Harry saw the dragon keepers rushing forward to subdue the Horntail, and over at the entrance to the enclosure, Professor McGonagall, Professor Moody, and Hagrid hurrying to meet him, all of them waving him toward them, their smiles evident even from this distance. He flew back over the stands, the noise of the crowd pounding his eardrums, and came in smoothly to land, his heart lighter than it had been in weeks. He had got through the first task. He had survived. "That was excellent, Potter!" cried Professor McGonagall as he got off the firebolt, which from her was extravagant praise. He noticed that her hands shook as she pointed at his shoulder. "You'll need to see Madam Pomfrey before the judges give out your score. Over there, she's had to mop up Diggory already."
"You did it, Harry," said Hagrid hoarsely. "You did it, and against the Horntail and all, and you know Charlie said that was the worst."
"Thanks, Hagrid," said Harry loudly, so that Hagrid wouldn't blunder on and reveal that he had shown Harry the dragons beforehand. Professor Moody looked very pleased, too. His magical eye was dancing in its socket.
"Nice and easy does the trick, Potter," he growled.
"Right then, Potter, the first aid tent, please," said Professor McGonagall. Victory. We've seen Harry victorious more than once. We've seen Harry victorious, well, at least once per book. Let's say that. Oftentimes, twice per book. But this is very different. We've seen Harry bask in the exaltation of his fellow students before. We've seen Harry warmed by the praise of his professors and figures of authority before. But we've never had Harry respond quite like this. This is a very different kind of victory, and it's in some ways tempting to look at this as a smaller victory, of course, because this is just the first task, and there are 2 more to come, and there's a lot of book left ahead of us. But this is also the singular moment of which Harry has been the most afraid in his career at Hogwarts to date. He was dreading this. We talked about that despair. We talked about that absence of hope. We talked about that isolation. We talked about that fleeting desire to leave Hogwarts. Now, yes, that desire was fleeting. It was destroyed almost immediately because, as he says, he's only ever been happy at Hogwarts. I'll just continue to add the asterisk to that thought, parenthetically including the burrow at the end of it, but that's just for me more than anything else. Harry here, though, is still focused. He's still contemplative. He's not transformed back from the exceptional figure that he usually is into the boy that he is the rest of the time, right? That is generally how the pattern of victories for Harry Potter go. He will face off against the bad guy. He will oftentimes be knocked unconscious. He will wake up in the infirmary. Dumbledore will say some soothing and cryptic things, and that's the end of the book, you guys. Harry will, in that hard-cut transition of unconsciousness, come back from his exceptional state, come back from his heightened heroic state into a more childlike state. He will be restored to his boyhood. He will no longer be Harry Potter. He'll just be Harry again. But that hasn't happened here. Instead, we get to see him meeting his professors on a much more level playing field than he usually does, and stepping up to protect Hagrid, even in this moment of great joy and great celebration, stepping up to protect Hagrid. So you'll see the flying back over. He flew back over the stands, the noise of the crowd pounding in his eardrums, and came in smoothly to land, his heart lighter than it had been in weeks, ellipsis. He had got through the first task. He had survived, ellipsis. Connecting those two thoughts in that fragmentary Harry Potter internal monologue, chain of experience kind of way, right? This impressionistic sense of what Harry is going through in that moment. His heart lighter than it had been in weeks. He had got through the first task. He had survived. He's not thinking about victory at all. He's not thinking about success at all. He's thinking about survival. He's now no longer afraid. "That was excellent, Potter," cried Professor McGonagall as he got off the firebolt, which from her was extravagant praise, right? We still get this distancing, which from her was extravagant praise. He noticed that her hand shook as she pointed at his shoulder. He's not thinking, "Oh, my shoulder has been rent apart by a dragon." He's not clutching his shoulder. He's not falling to the ground. We're not getting a Potter response. He's very cool in this moment. He's very, very calm, very himself, but also still a champion, also a potential champion here for Hogwarts. Hagrid celebrating with him, of course, against the Horntail and all. Charlie said that was the worst. Harry's still protecting Hagrid, even though that's probably irrelevant at this point. It's pretty cute stuff. "Nice and easy does the trick, Potter," says Moody. "Right then, Potter, the first aid tent," says Professor McGonagall. So let's take a quick run through here. So Cedric goes up first, and he fights the Swedish short snout. He uses the transfiguration spell to transform the rock into the dog that the dragon chases, and then he gets his egg that way, but he does get burned. Fleur goes up against the common Welsh green. She enchants, she glamours, she sleeps the dragon, right? There's some sort of casting of a charm spell on the dragon here. But then as she is retrieving the egg, the dragon snores. There's a jet of flame. Her skirt is set afire and she has to put it out with water from her wand. But otherwise, she is okay. Victor Crumb goes up against the Chinese fireball. He uses a charm to attack the eyes of the dragon, at which point it stumbles around and smashes half of its eggs, which is why he is significantly marked down in the final challenge. So Harry and Victor end up tied for first place, Cedric in second, Fleur in third. That is how the, just observing the movement of the plot here, just so we can have that in our mind as we move on. They are then also given the, well, let's get to it. In fact, this is going to be the last slide that we do tonight. I was optimistic, and yet we've still made terrific progress tonight, which I'm very, very pleased about. Picking up the golden egg and his firebolt, feeling more elated than he would have believed possible an hour ago, Harry ducked out of the tent, Ron by his side, talking fast. I'm sorry, I forgot we actually have 2 more slides. We've got this one first. You were the best, no competition. Cedric did this weird thing where he transfigured a rock on the ground, turned it into a dog. He was trying to make the dragon go for the dog instead of him. Well, it was a pretty cool bit of transfiguration, and it sort of worked because he did get the egg, but he got burned as well. The dragon changed its mind halfway through and decided it would rather have him than the Labrador. He only just got away. And that Fleur girl tried this sort of charm. I think she was trying to put it into a trance. Well, that kind of worked too. It went all sleepy, but then it snored and a great jet of flame shot out and her skirt caught fire. She put it out with a bit of water out of her wand. And Crumb, you won't believe this. He didn't even think of flying. He was probably the best after you, though. Hit it with some sort of spell right in the eye. Only thing is, it went trampling around in agony and squashed half the real eggs. They took marks off for that. He wasn't supposed to do any damage to them. This is Ron's stream of consciousness now that he and Harry are reunited. I didn't pull the slide where they are actually reunited because reading it is very flat and actually takes a long time to unfold, but unfold it does, and it's really rather lovely. The moment of antagonism, that prickle of antagonism still between the two of them, and then the sudden transition that is over before it has begun. Harry has already decided that he doesn't need the apology from Ron before Ron is offering the apology. They both arrive at that point mutually, independently, yes, but also at the same time, and it's really quite lovely and very true of that adolescent experience. So Ron here giving us the somewhat jumbled recap of what happened, and then we get on to the instructions for the next task. Fleur, Cedric, and Crumb all came in together. One side of Cedric's face was covered in a thick orange paste, which was presumably mending his burn. He grinned at Harry when he saw him. "Good one, Harry." "And you," said Harry, grinning back. "Well done, all of you," said Ludo Bagman, bouncing into the tent and looking as pleased as though he personally just got past a dragon. "Now, just a quick few words. You've got a nice long break before the second task, which will take place at 9:30 on the morning of February the 24th. But we're giving you something to think about in the meantime. If you look down at those golden eggs you're all holding, you'll see that they open. See the hinges there? You'll need to solve the clue inside the egg because it will tell you what the second task is and enable you to prepare for it. All clear? Sure? Well, off you go then." So now we have our anchor point for our transition into the second act of the Triwizard Tournament, but really continuing the second act of Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. We're going to continue to push forward through the tasks, but now we're linking them together more effectively. This golden egg mystery clue is going to be pretty effective through the course of the next couple of chapters. That is going to do it, I think, you guys. It has been an absolute pleasure to hang out with you tonight. Okay, let me see. Spoiler alert, says Erica. What do we feel about Fleur being in last throughout the competition? Is it gender inequality or just a coincidence? Okay, we can talk about the other tasks and challenges when we get there. I wanted to, let me cancel this slide here so I can actually join you. Hello, good evening. I wanted to talk a little bit about the first task and what it represents. I wanted to talk a little, because we've been talking about, right, the tripartite structure of the Triwizard Tournament, the tripartite structure of the champions, ostensibly, although in this particular instance we have 4, how that relates to the structure of the houses at Hogwarts, how all of this relates to what we think of as virtue within the context of Harry Potter, and particularly how we look at our power trio at the heart of the story, our ethos, pathos, logos power trio. It is my contention that to the degree that the 3 tasks map to that pathos, ethos, logos structure, and I'm not completely sure that they do, but to the degree that they do, this is the ethos challenge, right? This is go get that egg. Go take action. Doesn't matter what action you take, doesn't matter what you do, doesn't matter how you decide to approach it. Go get that egg. Take action. That is what is going to get you through this. And of course, That's why I was putting that stress on the lesser meaning of accio in Latin, meaning I act or I take action, right? It's very interesting and specific use of the faux Latin spell names that we get throughout Harry Potter for that to be the spell that Harry is reliant upon in this challenge that is about taking action. The second challenge, for those of you who have already read the book and are looking ahead, the second challenge I would take to be the Pathos challenge because it is anchored in that love and loyalty, right? More on that as we get to it. And then the third challenge, at least nominally, is the Logos challenge because it is the labyrinth. It is about navigating and kind of keeping an appropriate perspective on one's bearings and one's adventure there. So again, a little loose, a little fuzzy, but still pressing. What do we make of Fleur coming in last? I don't like it, I have to say. I think it is both politically problematic, I suppose, right? In terms of representation within the course of these books, it is somewhat problematic that Fleur should just come in last and, as you said, remain pretty much last throughout the rest of the Triwizard Tournament. I also don't like it narratively. I just don't find it that compelling. I am so much more charmed by Fleur's approach to resolving this problem than I am by, honestly, either Victor's or Cedric's. Like, honestly, also more than I am by Harry's. I like Fleur's solution to this puzzle the best. I think maybe causing the dragon to sleep is actually a very good approach. We're not going to fight. We're going to subvert expectation. That's a really strong Ravenclaw-esque, Ravenclaw-inclined kind of solution, right? Reject the premise of the question. You have to fight the dragon or elude the dragon in order to get the egg. No, I'm going to make the dragon go to sleep. And then I just get the egg by default, like it's not a problem. I like that as a solution very much. I don't like the snoring of the dragon setting her skirt on fire. That feels clumsy and comedic and weirdly gendered as well, right? I'm a little uncomfortable about all of that. So yeah, I don't love how the Triwizard Tournament treats Fleur, honestly. And I think the way that the Triwizard Tournament treats Fleur is partly responsible for the way that readers in general respond to Fleur. As we've discussed before, with a few bold exceptions, I know Becca's joining us this evening, with a few bold exceptions, Fleur is not well liked by the readers of the Harry Potter series. Like, she is not a fan favorite character in most cases. She is actually one of my favorite characters. I really appreciate her. And I know that Becca does too. And I think that it is not her performance in the Triwizard Tournament as much as it is the way that the narrative surrounding the Triwizard Tournament treats Fleur that is problematic. We're going to have a much better opportunity to talk about this when we get to the second test, which I think is probably the most difficult for Fleur there. But also, narratively speaking, if we're looking at the narrative structure, a really great bit of composition for Harry too. So we'll be able to get into that in just a little bit. Let me skip ahead here and tell you about next week's reading, which is now sounding terribly, terribly ambitious. Actually, next week's reading is a little short. So we should be able to do both of the things that we are planning to do. So next week, we will look at Chapter 21, the House Elf Liberation Front, and we will look at, as you can see on your slide, Chapters 22 and 23, The Unexpected Task and The Yule Ball. That will be at 10 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. Central on March 20th. That is next Tuesday evening, March 20th, 10 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. Central for Chapters 21, 22, and 23. 23 is pretty short and insubstantial. There's some nice character stuff. 21, as I said, is very insubstantial. I only pulled 3 slides for the entirety of that chapter. So I think it's entirely possible that we can do 3 slides for next week's reading. Hey, remember back at the beginning of this series when I confidently declared that we could probably do 3 slides every week? How wrong I was. There's just too much to discuss here. And there are a number of questions here in the polls. Okay, I'm going to take 5 minutes and do some questions. This is a very popular question. This has been upvoted 13 times here in the live chat. Becca asks, so in this book, we talk a lot about the way characters treat other species. These are mom dragons who have had their babies stolen. Was this intentional or tone deaf? Well, this is interesting. They haven't... okay. The dragons are here with their eggs. Probably, right? I don't think that there's anything that we can find in the text. There is that line when Harry is rising up from the enclosure when he's looking down and he sees the golden egg glinting among its concrete-colored counterparts. And I thought, wait, are those fake eggs? Because that's actually really smart. That's a really good idea. If they're all fake eggs apart from the golden egg, that's awesome. But then the Victor Crumb's dragon, the red dragon, smashes a bunch of eggs as a result of the charm that he casts on its eyes. and that damage counts against him. So yeah, this is not great. Now, okay, let's draw a powerful distinction here, because when we talk about the treatment of other creatures within the frame of Harry Potter, we're generally talking about the treatment of other sapient but non-human creatures. So we're talking about gnomes and elves and centaurs and Vila and so on and so forth, right? Even, you know, Aragog, I suppose, is sentient, is sapient in that way. And there are werewolves too, of course, right? Like the animagus in general. That is different from how we talk about animals. And it seems as though, for all that we're leaning into the traditional Tolkienian fantasy depiction of dragons in this chapter, these dragons are just animals. They are not sapient in the way that thinking, speaking species are sapient. That seems consistent throughout, you know. And obviously we've got the subplot of the blast-ended Skrewts too, all the way through the book to date. And that seems to be a weird misfiring of a comedic subplot, right? This is Hagrid being cruel to animals for 6 months because he doesn't know what he is doing with them. And it's well-intentioned, but the kids are getting hurt and the creatures are getting hurt and it's not working out well at all. Yeah, it's not great. The staging of the first task against the dragons, I think, is the first time, and this is going to become much more powerful when we get to the second challenge, right? The second challenge is pretty clear about how this works. And then the third challenge in its subversion does something far worse. But this is the first point at which it becomes clear that what we're really doing here is bread and circuses. The reason that we want dragons, and the reason that we are, I think, supposed to be a little concerned about the treatment of the dragons, is that we are trying to distract the world. Why is the Triwizard Tournament happening? Well, yeah, friendship and comradeship and closer connections between the three largest wizarding schools in Europe, but also it's a big celebration that everyone can be distracted by. Is it a coincidence that the Triwizard Tournament is happening the same year as the Quidditch World Cup? No coincidence at all. Dark things are coming, and the Ministry is trying to give the people what they want, to distract the people from what's happening in the world, I think. That's my kind of, you know, conspiracy inclined or read of all of this. But I do think that it's a perfectly valid reading to be disturbed by the treatment of the dragons and the treatment of the dragon eggs in this sequence. And also to find that not insubstantial, to find that actually supported by inference in the course of the text. I think that it's entirely possible to see this as a part of that conspiracy. Yeah. Okay, I didn't mark that as answered. There we go. Alispin asks, how does the sanctioned cheating within the Triwizard Tournament affect or interact with the ostensible goals of the tournament, forming or strengthening international magical ties? Does it simply entrench loyalties within separate groups at the expense of bridge building between the participating schools? Yes. Okay. What is the purpose of the Triwizard Tournament? Is it to strengthen the bonds between the schools? Is it to instill within these children the spirit of positive intramural sporting competition? Or is it the Wizarding World equivalent of a new season of American Gladiators, right? Is this just spectacle? Or let me pick a reference from the early 1990s, because that would obviously be the most applicable. American Ninja Warrior. No, the Super Bowl, right? We've had the Super Bowl in the Quidditch World Cup, right? That kind of one-to-one comparison has played out. So now we're getting something that's more about individual accomplishment. Now it's American Ninja Warrior. Now it's, what is that show? That Ultimate Beastmaster show that's the same thing, like complete an obstacle course. Like, it's that kind of show. It's that kind of spectacle. Is that what we're doing? Is that why it is always so dangerous? Why is an intramural sports competition so dangerous? Well, because it's supposed to be dangerous, because it's supposed to be about spectacle, because it's supposed to be about excess. It's supposed to be frightening for the competitors and for the audiences too. That would be my read. If it's played straight and it is intended to strengthen ties between these schools, is it working? Well, no, absolutely not. In fact, everything about our approach to this Triwizard Tournament is undercutting the potential for stronger ties and for better integration. If this is really about strengthening ties between these schools, step one, have the delegations from the other schools integrate with Hogwarts. Have them integrate with the Hogwarts student body. Don't have them stay on their flying magical coach or their mysterious sunken ship. Don't do that. Have them come and stay in the castle. Have them make friends. Have them spend time within the context of life at Hogwarts. It isn't clear if the Beauxbatons and Durmstrang kids are actually attending classes. In fact, it's made pretty thoroughly clear that they are not, in fact, attending classes. They have the use of the Great Hall, they have the use of the library, but they are sleeping on their own terms. They are presumably taking classes on their own terms. They're not integrating. That would be step one, I would argue, of fostering better communication and better social interaction between the schools. We definitely don't get that in the context of the Triwizard Tournament. You guys, I am sorry, I am over time. That is going to do it. It has been an absolute pleasure talking about the first task with you all tonight. We will be back next week, as I said, 10 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. Central next Tuesday night for chapters 21, 22, and 23. And I promise you faithfully, we will do our level best to get through as many of those as we can. Guys, it's been an absolute pleasure. If you have questions, if you have ideas, if you have thoughts, if you have points of speculation, email me, pointnorthmedia@gmail.com, or head on over to the Point North Media forum, pointnorthmedia.com/forum. I cannot wait to hear all of your thoughts about this first task, all of your thoughts about the naming of Fleur and of Victor, Krum, and of Cedric, who is so often just Cedric, not even his full name. I'm really interested in all of that. Please get in touch and let me know what you think about it and about everything else too. I will talk to you all again next week. Until then, mischief managed. Good night all.